being said, I'd like to introduce our presenters. We have Shelly Keniston from Neakuho. She's the Director of Off-Campus Commuter Student Services at Bridgewater State University. And we also have Antonio Willis Berry, also from Neakuho, and he is the Director of Residence Life and Housing at College of Holy Cross. So thank you, Shelly and Antonio.
Awesome. Thank you, Alyssa, and thank you everyone for being here with us. Shelly and I are so excited to be joining you all. For those who are here a little bit early with us, you know that I am a mess and excited and fun and crazy. But we are really so glad to be here. And so I'm going to share my screen. Shelly, tell me what you see.
It's not in, there we go. Not in presentation mode yet. Yep.
Okay, where is it? Slideshow, here we are. From the beginning. All right, what do you see now? We're good?
Yeah, yes.
Yes, awesome.
Yes.
Alyssa, yes.
If you go to display settings up on the top in the middle, and then click that one, the top one, swap. There you go.
There we go.
Perfect.
I was like, there's something still wrong, but I didn't know how to fix it. Thank you, Alyssa.
Yep.
Well, like Alyssa said, this is our session entitled Mid-Level and Beyond, Charting Your Pathway to Becoming a Better Supervisor, presented by myself and Shelly. As Alyssa said, Antonio Willis Berry. I'm the Director of Residence Life and Housing at the College of the Holy Cross. I also get the privilege of serving as the Neakuho president currently at this moment. Actually, when we won the best of, I had just become president, and they did this for me until the moment it was announced. And so I was like, you all are kidding. That's a joke. But no, I think people really enjoyed our time together. And so I'm really excited to be with one of my good friends and one of my best friends, Shelly. And so Shelly, take it away.
So good afternoon. Shelly Keniston, she, her pronouns, Director of Off-Campus and Community Student Services, which I know sounds a little bit weird. My majority of my career was in residence life and housing up until like October of 2019, and I was asked at my campus to start this new office for commuter students. So still stay very connected as a past president of Neakuho to housing residence life, presenting in that area, obviously, and staying connected with the Neakuho family. So I think we wanted to just share a little bit about like why are we qualified to be presenting and talking about supervision as a whole and what our experience has been. And for me, I have been supervising staff of all levels for about 27 years. So similarly, like started out supervising resident assistants, and as I moved up and broadened my scope, I've supervised union and non-union staff, student and grad students, practicum students, custodial and trade staff, full-time security staff. And so for me, it's been supervising folks from age of 18 up to like 67, 68 years old. So I've always been in that realm of supervising and really enjoy it, but realize that I continue to learn something new about supervising and supervision every single year.
Yeah, and so for me, I started out as an indirect supervisor, which meant, and we'll talk more about what that means as we go along, but a quick synopsis of it is I was indirectly supervising a lot of people and I had no one reporting to me, but I had influence on a lot of people, and I did that for about 3 or 4 years before I got my own first direct report. And I thought I was more successful indirectly than I sometimes am as a direct supervisor, because indirectly, you can walk in and like drop something and then walk out, right? And I did that a lot until I learned and figured out what it was that I needed to be successful and how I could convince teams indirectly as an indirect supervisor to accomplish the goals that I had set out for myself. And so then I became a direct supervisor, and I enjoyed that experience. I've been doing that for about 6 years at this point. And I have people who've reported to me that are now AVPs, directors. They work in conduct. I just had one of my former employees. I'm just pivoted out of higher ed. He's at Comcast, and so it's been really cool to see the growth of people who I've worked with and supervised, and a lot of that has been because of sort of what Shelly and I are going to discuss with you all today as we try to figure out how we as we help you to become much better supervisors for the people that you are working with, regardless if that's indirectly or directly. Our hope is that you're able to take something from this session that you will be able to apply to your day-to-day. And for those that, if you've not supervised before, this is also a really good opportunity to learn what that experience is like so that you can become a better supervisor too, because that's what people are calling for us to be as leaders within our field. And so, but we'll talk more about that later as we sort of work our way through this presentation. Shelly, take it away.
Yeah, so one of the first things, normally in a room when we're together, we like to share who's in the room, what do you currently do? So we're asking here if you're comfortable in the chat to just, share your name. Your name probably comes up already, but your pronouns, position, institution you work at, and how long you've been in the field. If you want to share how long you've been supervising maybe instead, or add that as part of it, we would love to just be able to see that and for everyone to kind of know who's here. So if you have the ability to do that, we would love that. And it'll come up potentially a little bit later, but for the most part, it's a good way for folks to just kind of get a glance, especially since we are not just one region, it's open broadly. So thank you for all that do that.
Yeah.
Corrine, fun. I went to grad school. I just caught that. We went to grad school together. Fun. All right, go ahead. Carry on.
You sure? You sure?
Yeah.
Going down memory lane, I see. Yes.
I know. I was like, oh, go ahead.
So here's some of the goals. As you're still putting in the chat who you are, here's some of the goals that we have for ourselves for this afternoon. We're going to spend about the next 40 minutes really talking in depth about supervision, learning about how to be better supervisors, mentors, coaches. Shelly and I are going to share a multitude of experiences and also give you opportunities to come into the conversation with us and share some experiences that you had. And so using how Alyssa said, I'm just raising your hand, and then we can choose to come into the conversation and show your face or just to show your voice and hear your voice. On board with that. We're going to re-examine how we utilize and really define like Sanford's challenge and support, because I think everyone talks about it so much, like challenge and support. But what does that mean supervisory wise and as a supervisor? We're going to talk about biases a little bit and really end our time creating some action plans for how we're going to utilize what we learned today with our individual staffs to make us better supervisors and leaders in our individual industries. So I'm not sure if you knew this, but 82% of employees have said that they resign their jobs because of the attitudes that their supervisors come into their environments with. And so that's when I first read this. I was reading this Forbes report a couple of years back, and that data has remained about the same since that information came out. But 82% is a lot. Like 82% of people resigning just because of the attitude that their supervisor has showed Shelly and I that we need to be paying just a little bit more attention to supervision and helping both mid-level and senior level and people who are aspiring to be in those areas, helping us and them to think about how we are supervising in order to sort of lower this number if we can. And what's important, right? Supervisor compatibility really tops that list of what people are looking for in their workplace. And so there are multiple jobs that I'm sure we could like talk for days about how people take on responsibilities and they stay in spaces, no matter how toxic the institution may be or the experience they're having, they stay because of their supervisor or what their supervisor is offering, or they leave really quickly because of their supervisor too. And so if we can just be thinking about ourselves as supervisors and how we navigate, show up, show out in the spaces that we're in, I think that'll make the experience better for those who report to us, and in turn make our lives just a little bit easier in the work that we're doing. So transparently, my friends, here's our opportunity for us to begin to move forward. This is our opportunity for us to begin to move forward and to shift that narrative a little bit. I always use this slide when I'm talking with staff about supervision because there's either lie or truth. And people say there's always something in the middle that makes a lot of sense. But like, here's our opportunity to make that shift and to really move towards this truth place of really talking and owning who we are, what do we bring to this conversation, what do we like as supervisors, and how can we be better supervisors and for those who report to us. So now is our time, friends. It's now time for us to own that we may or may not be really good at this. It's time for us to own that we may or may not need just a little bit more support in supervision. It's time to own that there aren't courses that they teach us in grad school about how to be an effective supervisor for people who are not 18 to 22-year-olds, right? It's our time to now own that. And so the more we can own this truth and begin our path forward, I think that helps us to be a better supervisor. So I'm so happy that you're here today. I know Shelly's so happy that you're here today because the hope is that we through this time together, I know there are about 40 people with us this afternoon, that we begin to have 40 more people who are on this supervisory path of re-examining who they are to make themselves better for the places where they are working and the people that they are supervising or will supervise in the future. And so let's keep going.
So we also don't put ourselves forward as experts. We put ourselves forward as people that have had experiences and many years supervision between us, different types, different styles, and we offer it up as thoughts for your own consideration. Sometimes we love in the room when people are sharing their experience because, again, we don't pretend to know it all. So this next slide is a list of things that we just want you to take note of and think about for a minute. When reflecting on your own experience as a supervisor, have you ever noticed yourself doing any of these things? So we do want to give you just a couple of minutes to read through them. I'm going to pause for a second. Let you just read them quickly. And where we'll use these might come in a little bit later when Antonio has a pause where we ask you to think about something. So one of these might spark an idea for you. But really, it's about being honest with yourself, because no one's in the room necessarily holding you accountable to these items, but do you have that? Are you someone prone to any of these things? And maybe it's a starting point to rethink and change how you're doing something or be open to something different. So we pulled out a few definitions of supervision for us that stood out. So cron.com, you can see a workplace activity in which a manager oversees the activities and responsibilities of employees they manage. University of Virginia HR talks about supervisor expect to understand and be able to access many roles. So there's common roles of supervisors. We know we've talked about these before, but for the most part, they both refer to an act of you in oversight of another person or individual. So regardless of their position. And this is where we really think about indirect versus direct or functional supervision. And that's what Antonio was talking about in his intro, in his experiences that initially started as indirect, right? So direct supervision is you're listed as the supervisor, you do their evaluations, you're holding them accountable, performing all of the roles, providing work, providing feedback, all the pieces. Indirect or functional really is, sometimes we look at that as committee oversight. So if you had a committee on your campus or in your division, you functionally are overseeing them. Sometimes it's within roles where the Office of Student Conduct, my friend works at an institution where the Office of Student Conduct functionally supervises resident directors in the realm of their being hearing officers. And so they do have oversight to that extent. But we liked these definitions that we found. There's many. They all have to do with direct oversight of individuals. So just something that we wanted to put out there, where from the standpoint that we're coming from when we talk about supervision, and recognize that there are a few different kinds, direct, indirect, functional, however it's worded, but that they all matter and they all count. So, and they all have an important role.
The areas we're going to focus on today are all about educator, sponsor, coach, counselor, and director. So if we start right now with educator, you're educating as a supervisor. You can read this definition, but you act as a supervisor, as an educator, when you're talking with your staff about their position and what is it that's in their job description, or what are the CAS or COI standards or NASPA standards that they should be reaching. When you're having discussions with them about their goals, and really holding meetings, talking about policies and manuals or goals and cross training, right? So as educators, when we are supervising, that's that educational strength that we sometimes are. It's sometimes easier for us to do this in our supervision because we're teaching someone about their role, or we're trying to help them to navigate or change their direction. So we're doing a lot of educating. And this happens most with our direct reports, where we're educating them on what we expect. But I always go back with my direct reports to the COI standards. I actually just printed them off for my team for them to be able to see, like, here's where I need you to be. And so how do we, but by providing them with this education, I'm showcasing for them exactly what I'm looking for, what I'm hoping that they will engage in, and how I want them to be doing their work just a little bit differently. And so that's us as educators. That next word was sponsor, right? And so as supervisors, we get this really cool opportunity to sponsor and somewhat talk about our staffs and the work that they do, and to give them opportunities when that's going to support their goals and their trajectory, even when they're not in the room. And so as a supervisor, it's not like once I got to the place, once I became an assistant director, and then associate director, and then director, it was no longer about me, right? Me being the person to go off and do all these amazing things. It was really about how do I pull my team along and provide opportunities for my staff to be able to continue their growth. And so I would talk with my supervisees about what opportunities were coming up that were being offered to me. And I'd say, hey, this seems like something that you'd be really good at. I would like you to join me in this meeting, or I think you should go to that conversation for me. I talk a lot about how can I get them involved and get them engaged. And so some of that involvement is with Niakuho for me, or Makuho, or a KUOI, or any of the regional organizations. And so really getting them involved in those aspects, but opportunities for them to showcase what their strengths and talents are. Because as a supervisor, we start to hear more of that from them in our individual one-on-ones. And I know Shelly's going to talk more about like what a one-on-one looks like and how to be effective at that. But we get an opportunity as sponsors to ensure that our teams are showcasing their strengths and their abilities, and we're setting them up for success. And so I love that part about being a sponsor as an educator. I'm sorry, as a supervisor.
So we want to talk a little bit here about supporting your staff. And so we have some bullets up there, obviously, but we also want to highlight a couple of things here. So one of the first ones is to supervise the individual and not the group. And this was one of the things that I learned, I would say definitely the hard way. It was one of the first lessons I remember learning as a new supervisor, that everyone doesn't respond, and it doesn't matter generationally. Everyone doesn't respond the same way. Everyone isn't going to be able to be managed and supervised and led and coached in the same way. So understanding the difference and getting to know them as individuals is going to make the team overall function much better. So, you know, you have sometimes in a staff team, whether it's RAs, RDs, other staff that you're supervising a new staff member versus a seasoned staff member are two very different things. They need and typically require a very different level of your time and involvement, right? So you would think that in a seasoned staff member can be more autonomous. They can be given a basic direction and they know what to do and how to handle it. There's less need for training sometimes. But with a new staff member, everything is new. So if you're telling them to go to the RSU, you know, most of us all have that alphabet soup on our campuses. They might not even know where the RSU is or what that stands for or what that means. So there's a whole different level of time that's needed, care that's needed, and to not be frustrated that this person knows what to do and this person doesn't. And that seems like an obvious thing, but it's not always, especially when you're talking about staff support. So imbalance may seem that you spend more time with this person, but it's also an imbalance in terms of their own experiences and part of that development. One of the things too is don't ask them to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. So pitching in makes a difference. It's hard to always be, I mean, my examples used to be things like room inventories at the beginning of the year and room inspections and stuff like that, jumping in to help out. There's some grind associated with that, especially within housing and residence life, that typically shows that you can and will do some of the work with them. We're going to talk about feedback in a little while more specifically, but feedback works both ways. So really allowing for that. And then where it talks about like allowing staff to have an opinion when possible, right? We all know that there's times that there's directive we've been given and we need to just provide the information, but there's also times that we can be flexible. And what are those times that they can be part of creating and building so they don't just feel like they're there and take it on the time. And then recognition is a big thing for me. And so we always talk about how to be recognized, and the story that sticks out in my mind always, like I'm someone that would love to be, I love to be recognized and celebrated out loud publicly, no matter where, whatever. And there was an admin that worked in our office who would rather crawl under a table than be recognized. So she very excitedly would accept just a card on her desk and no fanfare and no discussion, and don't make a public display, just leave the card and walk away. She wouldn't even open the card at work. But the point is that's part of learning who your staff are and learning who they are individually and what motivates them. Because if I publicly recognized her, that was very demotivating, and she would shut down because it was like a negative impact to her. So really taking the time to get to know staff and sharing a little bit of who you are is super important. There's many others. If you have something that you do, you can certainly throw it in the chat just by way of sharing, but we're going to go to a pause that Antonio is going to walk us through next.
Yeah. Thank you, Shelly. So let's pause just for a moment. I'm going to turn the slideshow off and briefly just for a second. And I want you to think about and even come into the conversation, raise your hand and come on into the conversation. As you're thinking about one thing that you hope or plan to start, that's wrong. Once you return to your campus, you're already at your campus. But once you get off this Zoom screen, right, that addresses your role as an educator or a sponsor, what are those things when you think back to that list that Shelly gave us at the start of areas where people have that we've noticed within ourselves that we might not have been the best supervisor? What are some things that you could be doing to address that as both an educator or a sponsor with the intent of better supporting your individual staff? And so I'm going to stop sharing, give you an opportunity to come on in and join us. You can also put those things in the chat, but we'll spend just a few seconds here, a few minutes here, because I think it's important, as Shelly was mentioning earlier, for us to be talking more about this collectively, because we're not the experts in this. I mean, I know you all have some amazing things that you're doing yourselves to showcase your individual phenomenalness as a supervisor that may be helpful for others in the chat or on the Zoom screen to hear and recognize. So I know that someone put in the chat, recognizing and motivating my team. Yeah. Is there a way in particular you recognize and motivate them that helps them to feel supported and cared for? I know some people do the what is it called? Where you do the 5 things: gifts, talents, no, not talents, it's gifts, words of affirmation, love languages. Some people do the love languages, right? As a way of hearing from their staffs, what are the things that they like and how they like to be recognized. I really appreciate that. I love that, Max. Food and praise. Yes, feed me. No, I'm only kidding. Food is good, right? And giving them opportunities to try out some different and new things. It's a really great way to showcase who we are as supervisors. Thank you. What else are people thinking? And if at any point you're like, I want to jump right in there, I need Antonio and Shelly to know what I'm thinking, that would be awesome. Oh, there's some more
Ooh,
great
love that.
nuggets in the. I'm sorry, go
I
Shelly.
love that one. No, did you see that? Reminding staff to use their PTO, mental health days, and personal days.
Mm,
That's really great.
mhm.
If you have a supervisor that supports that and reminds you to do that and encourages that, do it. I
Oh,
mean, you're blessed. I mean, that's amazing. I love that.
yeah. Mm, some beautiful nuggets. Beautiful nuggets. All right, we will keep going. Let me go back to sharing. You have to tell me what you see, Shelly. I think I did it right that time.
Yep, you got
Yeah,
it.
perfect.
So we're going to move on to one of the third of the 5 areas that we wanted to touch base on, and it was as a coach. And so this one really is about coaching an employee when you're explaining, encouraging, planning, correcting, checking in. You're challenging them and expecting great results. So having effective one-on-ones, including them and asking them, how do you think our team is doing? How can things be improved? How are you doing? How are we doing? The coaching really is about encouraging their goals. So I like to work with staff and have a personal goal um, for their own professional development, professionally, personally, like what are you focused on and how can I help you? And part of the coaching is providing them opportunity. So if I know my staff, and I know, for example, I have a second year grad student who's about to be looking for jobs, but I know where his passion is. And I saw an opportunity and I connected him, and he, out of that, got a practicum that's really focused in the area that he didn't even understand could be part of his higher ed degree. And so that's part of coaching, is seeing things, providing them opportunities. And we don't all have large professional development budgets. So sometimes the opportunity is another division on your own campus, a connection of your friend in the field. So coaching is about that kind of play, giving them options, reality checks, and moving them forward in that way. So challenge and support, and Antonio can jump in also, but
Mhm.
one of the things that happens, right? Like it's an easy one. If you say, tell me about a theory that you worked with, challenge and support, Nevitt Sanford, everyone seems to know it. I think that it's sometimes misunderstood or misused a little bit, right? So it's not just as a supervisor, I'm going to challenge them and I'll support them, but there's a formula to it. And I love these quotes that we picked out where it talks about supporting and challenging, and you can read those. But one of the things that we like to highlight is there's got to be an appropriate amount of support, an appropriate amount of challenge. And in knowing your staff, there's a breaking point, right? Like you don't want to challenge them so much that they feel like they're going to fail.
Mhm.
The challenge has to be little pushes at a time and not blindsiding and making them kind of feel like they're not going to be able to achieve that. And support can be smothering in some ways as well. So what is the right balance? Sometimes we miss the mark. There's room for correction. But I think that for me, one of the things that we talk about is not just using the words like I gave him a challenge and I supported him through it. Like that's easy to say, but that's what I liked about these is success is about growing yourself so that when you become a leader, success is all about growing others. And so the challenge and support is really about growth and not setting them up for failure. Antonio, you want to say anything about challenge and support?
Yeah, I think so. If we take that better, right, into like how can we better challenge support too? Hedges also went forward, right, and said a few more things that I think would be beneficial along with sort of what Shelly was ending with. So Hedges is she's a writer for Forbes, who really writes significantly about our work as supervisors. And so I'd highly recommend like looking her up. But some things additionally she said was that like as we challenge support, we need to be looking for potential in others and calling it out, right? We should be pushing people out of complacency. We should be making failure a learning process. We should remind our employees that it's about the effort, not just the innate skills. And Shelly and I added the fifth one because she's not a higher ed professional, so it applies. But we were like, yeah, we need to tell people this, that like how we challenge and support full-time professionals is very different than what we do for student staff. And so for some of our first, second, third year supervisors, they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to do the exact same thing I did with my RAs, right? I'm going to do the same thing I did with my grad students, right? And it's a very drastically different experience when working with a full-time staff member who has 40 hours a week that they are dedicated, 35 to 40 hours, depending on what you do at your school, per week that they are dedicating to this work and to this craft. And so how do you intentionally challenge and support them so that they feel cared for, but also that they are learning and growing and developing? What do you think may be missing from sort of what Shelly and I have shared so far about challenge and support? Because I like it's hard, my friends. It is quite difficult, especially in today's with today's population of people and professionals entering into our profession. Many of them have lived in this gratification era, right, where they have always been on their phones, and that make me sound really old, and I don't mean for that to be the case because I am not that much older. But they live in this world where they're always on their phones getting instant gratification, and so when they come into their one-on-ones, many of them are like, "Oh yeah, give me what I want right now. I'm so excited. I need positive intent always, always, always." And then the challenge is difficult, and so I sit with these sort of 5 points often as I'm trying to do this work. And so for you all, what is missing for you? What might be missing? Throw that in the chat. Enter the conversation if you have other things that people should be considering and thinking about. I loved what Kiana just said about oh, not that one. I'm sorry. I rolled up too fast. Yeah, here we are. I love what Cleta said about challenging staff to come with solutions, right? Because often they just are like, well, you fix it. Like you are the boss, fix it for us, right? And it's so important for us to be reminding them that they are smart and capable too. We just don't hire everybody, right? There's a reason and a particular reason you hired the person that you're working with. So reminding them of that and the importance of that. But phenomenal stuff, phenomenal stuff. Come on in. I thought I did what you wanted me to do, Shelly. If I didn't do what you were asking me to do, call me out on it. Yes.
Nope, you're great. No one wants to talk today.
They like hearing our voices. I don't mind. I love a good.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, come on in,
I
Kiana.
don't mean that. Yes, let's go.
Hello? Wait, hold on. Can everyone hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay,
It's just
great.
a little soft.
I'll use my big girl voice.
There we go.
Only because I don't feel like typing a lot. So I will talk. One thing I do to challenge my staff is asking them questions. I currently supervise 10 resident assistants and a grad assistant. And when a lot of my RAs, we meet for our one-on-ones and we discuss program and what they want to implement, a lot of them have great ideas, but it seems to be very surface level and base. And like part of our educational curriculum that we're implementing is obviously the curriculum, the educational portion of it. So when they're doing programs, and for instance, we just had a program about they gave out Celsius and planners, and that's all they were going to do originally. And like, oh, this is an academic program because we're giving out planners. I was like, okay, well, when it comes to educational programs, we need to understand that we have to give them something, but also they have to take something away from us. So I'm asking them, like, what are the learning outcomes? What are they learning from this program? It's got to be more than just giving out something and they just walk away, because that becomes a very passive program and it's not as much interaction in education. So I ask my RAs like questions like, okay, so what are the outcomes? What are we learning? What does this look like? What does that look like? How can you add more to this to get through that, to help them navigate that thought process, to dig deeper into their programs?
Hey,
Great point.
yeah, thank you for sharing it. And that is so real, right? Because it's so easy to be like, here's a pizza party, right? And but like, what is the educational stuff that's coming out of that, right? I love that. And for us as managers, getting our staffs to the place that you're in right now, Kiana, is sometimes hard and sometimes very easy, because I need the staff to be thinking about something very similar to as they're approving programs. Because as you know, some places are in budget crises and they want to know exactly what we're using money for, right? And what are we actually programming for, and why are we using why are we wasting? I'm gonna use wasting, but that's not what I mean, wasting students' time. And so how do we defend our why and what we need? Sydney, come on in.
So when I was looking at this list that's like in front of us now, I think something that I guess stands out for me in a place where I probably disagree, is making failure a learning process. Not that I don't think that failure is a learning process, but when I think about my staff and my role in my area where I have my full-time staff working and putting on events, programs, engaging with folks. Sure, I would like failure to be a learning process, but also at the end of the day, sometimes I can't let this fail. And there has to be some type of proactive engagement to make sure that we're not getting to that point. So it makes me think a lot about that, because like an example, we had family weekend this past weekend. We were not going to fail family weekend. It was going to go well regardless of what happened, yes, no, whether I had to step in and take control. So I think a lot about that, where yes, failure is a learning process, but I think for our full-time staff, we need to be pretty cognizant of how far do we go to that failure. And you can shut me down. I don't know how to stop.
No, you're good.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I'll take you, Shelly. I thought you were gonna pop in there. No, you know, if I could do this again, Sydney, I put a little asterisk by that one, right? Because you are correct. We have to sometimes, as supervisors, we create barriers for our teams, or not barriers. That's not what I mean. I think about supervision sometimes as a bowling alley where you can put those bumper cars up, or not bumper cars, those bumpers up. They're not cars, those bumpers up. And so they're hitting the bumpers along the way, right? And then we talk about those bumpers and why they hit that bumper, and how did I readjust their pathway, because I agree there are some things that they can't fail on, right? But then there are things in our times where within this microcosm that we call supervising, that we can let them we can somewhat let them fail on. Some really great examples of that for me. Even if we don't think if we're not thinking programmatically, like I have a staff member that had a really bad parent conversation, really bad parent phone call. I coached them through it. We talked about the phone call before they did it. They had the phone call and it went awfully, right? Like awful, where the president's office got called, got called because of it. And then I had to step in and showcase for them what we do moving forward and how we navigate and manage some of these issues. From their perspective, that was a failure. And they were like, oh, I failed because Antonio had to get involved, because the director had to get involved in something that should have been handled at a different level. And I'm like, no, yes, that was a bad phone call, but let's talk through this so that it doesn't happen again. And so that's really what we mean by like making it a learning process, is how do you take what is going on with your individual employees and really help them to see here's where we might have gone wrong and what can we do differently next time so that we don't find ourselves in these similar places and these similar traps. But I appreciate that so much, Sid. The next thing, and then we will take another quick, well, we might not quite take a quick pause because I'm like loving the conversation. The next one is about being a counselor, right? And so counseling is utilized when employees are noticing a problem. And that really goes back to that failure behavior that Sydney and I were just talking about, that they're having repeat behavior, repeat issues that sometimes may lead to formal disciplinary actions. And so we're a counselor when we're helping to sort of redirect their energy and redirect their path to get to a place that can be encouraging, supportive. Sometimes it's positive, it's intended to be positive. And I say there's a difference between positive and nice, because sometimes we can't be like completely cheery and nice in that way, but I will be positive and supportive in explaining to you what we are doing and why we are doing it. And nice is something that you may feel that you may feel that I was kind in it, but I want you to know the impact that is happening. And so the employees should be solving the problem. And our role in that as a counselor is to ensure that they are getting through it and really learning and growing and developing. And so that's what that counseling approach is. We would have taken a pause here, but like I said, we've been loving the discussion. But one of the pauses we would have taken is where we said, like, what is one thing that you plan to stop doing that might have caused some harm to you, your direct report, or those you indirectly supervise, especially as you're thinking about yourself as a counselor, right? What are some of those things that we are doing as supervisors that aren't actually helping them to be successful? And so being able to think about that and reflect on that. So I hope you spend some time as you're reflecting on this presentation that we've been doing, sitting in that bit of this discomfort of understanding that, like, we may be a part of the problem, right? We may be a part of the issue, and there may be one or two small things that we can shift within ourselves to make us better supervisors. But I hope that's something that you're also thinking about yourself.
And I think just to add a quick tiny example of that would be, are you role modeling poor behavior? Are you role modeling poor balance or work-life balance? Are you texting and working until 10 or 11 at night? So what are we role modeling is just a quick like example of something that came to mind for me.
Yeah. I do this thing where my staff knows that I am an early AM emailer, right? So I will send emails at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, but I don't, I schedule send them all so they arrive in their inbox at 8:30, right? That's one of the ways that I know that just because it works for me to send emails at 5 o'clock in the morning, I know that people get them and they immediately think they need to respond quickly. And so I started like delay sending my messages. Which is, I know, bad role modeling of work-life balance, but for my sanity, I had to do that for myself, right? And so that's something I knew that was harming my team that I had to shift. Yeah, Max, come on in.
Yeah, I was gonna say one of my expectations up front is when I hire people, I tell them don't necessarily follow my behaviors. So I at least put that up front and be like, hey, I may email you at 8, 9, but it doesn't mean that you have to get back to me.
Mhm.
So I think that's how I don't foresee it stopping. But it
Yes.
is that expectation that sets up front.
Mhm. Agreed.
Great.
Thank you, Max. Thank you. Agreed wholeheartedly. It's like, do what I don't do what I say as I do, or something like that. But that's not what I mean. And not in that way. But yeah, I love that as an expectation up front, right? But you're like, here's who I am. Right? It is who I am, but I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to respond to me.
Yes.
Another one, and this last one before we go into some other like really good stuff, is all about directing. And when I became a director, I had to really sit with this definition. So directing is used when performance problems continue and you assume that you've educated them, that you've coached them, that you've counseled them. Now you need to direct, right? And so your conversations end up being more like here's you're making like recommended alternatives and saying like, here's what's going to happen, and being clear about what's going to occur next. You're calm, but you're serious. You might get HR involved, right? Or you might make sure that the meeting is thoroughly documented. And that is distinctly different. That is a distinct difference from being a director. And so I had to sit with that as the director, I'm doing all of these things and managing an office and trying to do so many other things. But in the directing phase is when I am sort of clearly documenting what's happening in order to help my employees be more successful and more supported and more careful in their work. I'm clearly documenting that, and sometimes involving others. And this is the one that people struggle with the most, because it sometimes feels like we are telling on, right? And that's not ever the case in directing. It's really being able to help employees be better at their positions. And sometimes we have to step into this uncomfortable place of being directing when all these other aspects that Shelly and I have discussed with you today have not gone the way that we wanted them to go.
So I think I can't type in the messaging that you all can see each other typing in. So I had sent a message and I think it went to ourselves. But I was saying to Kirsten, posted a really good point where they said that work-life balance isn't necessarily a thing, it's work-life integration, and that is 100% wholeheartedly. So I just wanted to give that a little shout out, because it is about peaks and valleys and finding balance ultimately, but it's not always going to be in balance. So
Yep.
I love that point. Real quick, we'll just touch on feedback, but I think what's really important is to know that in a relationship of supervision, it's not just about you telling them what's going on. Sure, that is definitely part of it. And there's definitely different formats of feedback. I am not a big proponent for giving anyone negative feedback or correcting anyone if I don't have to publicly. I don't think that that's the time or place for it, unless it's going to be immediately harmful or something, there's some step into what's happening needed. But there's, having engaged one-on-ones. Do you have an agenda set? Is part of it about just asking how they're doing? It's not just all business. Sharing a little bit back and forth of what's going on, even as a supervisor. So that's a time for you as well. There's formal evaluations. These things need to be ongoing. I used to say when I supervised all the RDs who supervised in the RAs, a RA would show up 10 minutes late to a staff meeting and they would come in and say, I need to terminate Joseph. And I'm like, what happened? He's 10 minutes late to a staff meeting. And I'm thinking, well, listen, you haven't made it on time to a meeting yet this week. But it's more about what's the ongoing feedback. If you get one evaluation a year, I don't think that should be when you hear something in March that happened last September. You don't hold things. That's why the regular one-on-ones, integrating that feedback, it's timely, it needs to be consistent, ongoing. And people have different styles of how they receive feedback, which is, again, goes back to what we said to you about getting to know your staff, whether they're student staff, full-time staff, any of the other variations of supervisory relationships. Some people do a feedback sandwich, here's something great, here's something you need to work on, here's something else great. Some people do it, there's a great 1-minute manager theory as well. You can look that up. It talks about how to give feedback and focus on the individual. I'm a person that just likes to have direct feedback. And I used to think just everybody would love direct feedback. And so as a young supervisor, I would just be direct with all of my supervisees, and I didn't know the number of people that left crying. And then I had to kind of learn that piece of it and how to give feedback. So it's something to think about. It's something just to be aware of, having an ongoing, continuous feedback.
And as Oprah says, everyone gets feedback. You get feedback,
Yep.
get feedback, everybody gets feedback.
Everyone.
It's everybody's feedback, yes.
Exactly. And be open to it backwards too. So you can ask them for feedback about you, or, some institutions do 360 reviews where your supervisees and supervisors and peers give feedback, but it's important to be open. And I used to think that wasn't true, but as I learned and became more open to hearing it, it made me a better supervisor, I think, over time, where if staff are comfortable enough to share with you something that they felt you were doing wrong or inappropriate, I think that is an amazing relationship. Not that you did something wrong or upset them, but that they are comfortable enough to have that conversation with you. So I just try to say to people, just always be open to that. But it goes to communication, right? So the next one, there's definitely some missing. This is a dated slide. But there's effective conversations, and there's different things that work in different ways. Like some of the things not even on here really are things like DMs, texting, Teams messages? What are other ways that you use to communicate? I used to put stuff in students' mailboxes. There's not really mailboxes per se, or what are you leaving in there? Like a handwritten letter or a note or something like that. But thinking about what are the best ways, because we had a big debate, even as a full-time staff, about when's it appropriate to text? What is Teams emergent or not? Email, phone call, like what are the layering and methods of communication and what fits under what umbrella? So just being open to that. Like for example, for me, I give my phone number to my student staff and my full-time staff, but it's clear when to use it and when not to use it. We're just not in a group chat about what's going on today. There's different levels. So
I would also add, Shelly, quickly,
yeah,
if I could, that I think it also depends on the person too, right? And it comes back and like I have 4 direct reports and they all want something different in how we communicate. So one says
Right.
like I need an email because email helps them to stay organized, right? Another needs a Teams chat or a G chat. Another wants a text message. Another says, please don't call me, right?
Yeah,
And call it emergency, right?
Right.
I'm gonna have to call you sometimes. But it also is, you just have to be thoughtful about how you're communicating and what that effective communication looks like. I mean, so I love that. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. No, you're good. Yeah. So lastly, I'm gonna leave this up here. We are at we have about 7 minutes left. You can read this. I do recommend as a read, if you're looking to increase your supervisory skills, the mid-level manager in student affairs is a great resource. We took a lot of things out of that book for this presentation. It looks different based on where your staff's at, but these are just some key takeaways. Niakuho. Antonio, you want to give a plug for anything coming up?
Yes, if you are in the Niakuho region and you want to go to a conference, we are closing our conference registration on September 30th. I'll be there. Shelly will be there. Sydney will be there. Others will be there. As we're talking about, like, there's sessions about supervision. There's sessions about how to be a better how to be a better manager, how to learn about RE training and selection and housing operations and the enrollment cliff. Like, we're so excited. Kauai is doing some really cool things too. And so don't get me wrong, Kauai is doing some amazing things. And so if you're free in October, the Biz Ops Conference is a great opportunity to learn housing operationally, how to be a better supervisor. But we're going to have a good time with both at Niakuho. Makuho is next week if you're in the Makuho region. Not next week. It is next week. Yeah, Makuho is next week. And so I may stop by that. It's about a 4-hour drive for me, but I love the Makuho people. And so like we're gonna have a great time, but there's so many things and places you can be going to be thinking about your supervision and how you can be a better supervisor, because it isn't easy and it is a skill that is being sharpened on a daily basis. I mean, we even talk about identity driven stuff too, right? Where like your identity comes into play with your supervision. Like I had a supervisor once who said to me, she said that I was the first Black employee that she had supervised. And so one of the things that we talked a lot about is what my experience was like. So that was an important part of me feeling supported and cared for within my at work and with my supervisory relationship. And so really just thinking about who the people are that you're supervising and what is it that they individually need that's going to help them to be successful. But that's all I had. I just had some other thoughts, but that's in the end of there. What can we answer? Do we have time for questions?
We do.
Yeah, oh,
About
perfect.
5 minutes.
Yeah, what can we answer?
And I think if you can raise your hand and unmute, or if you want to share a tidbit or something that is great, you can unmute. We can unmute you and you can just share it, or you can drop something in the chat or add a question. Did we have questions pop up in the question and answers? No?
Nothing that you missed.
Okay. Okay.
Ashley, come on in, my friend.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. I've never not been heard in my life. So that would be a one for me.
Nice.
So I went to this session through an HR session at my university, and they talked about, exit interviews and stay interviews being the opposite of that. So why do you stay here? What motivates you? how are we doing? I kind of broke mine up and made my own prompts, but one was about like your plate, your workload. Talk to me about the tasks that you have. Talk to me for improvements. What's on your wish list? What's the thing that you're like, I've always wanted to do this, but somebody told me it wasn't possible. Let's rip that open one more time and see what we can do. Is there areas to improve efficiency? The second category was about the team. And about how on the team, how's our culture, how's everybody doing? Are there things that we can do differently in terms of recognition or professional development? And then the third category I did was about myself and about the leadership in our department. You know, what do I need to do better? What do I need to do the same? What do I need to do differently? What do I need to stop doing to be able to make their experience better? And just the fact that I asked opened up such fantastic conversations outside of one-on-ones, outside of staff meetings. So if anybody would like to share, I'm going to throw my email in the chat. I'm happy to share the guide that I created, but it was awesome. So I wanted to throw that in here, that it went really well.
Do you think you're going to do them again this year, like each year?
Yeah, so I did them as part of the PDP cycle.
Oh.
So after I'm done giving you feedback, this is your opportunity to tell me how we're doing from your perspective. So it also makes PDPs less painful because it allows more of a conversation, particularly for folks when we have some tough discussions to have. So it went great for asking.
That's really cool.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. All right. I think we're at our time. So thank you everyone for joining us. We appreciate it.